Hello there everyone and welcome to another episode of the Long Live Rock and Roll podcast. As usual, you're here with myself, Laz, and my esteemed co-host, Mr. Felipe. We're currently in a hotel room at the moment, waiting for a gig tomorrow, aren't we?
Yeah.
Come down for overnight, going to go out with the band and the roadies later for some drinks and a meal, which should be nice. But for now, we're going to record another episode of the podcast, and today we are focusing on a band that Felipe has chosen called Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Felipe,
right.
Why don't you tell us about the three of them? Because those are names, by the way. That's not a band name that someone thought, that sounds good as a band name. Those are three.
Let's just pick some random names. Shall we call ourselves
Terry, Lawrence and Luke. That should be our band name. Yeah, no, tell us about Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Well, first of all, hello everyone. Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or ELP.
Yeah,
that sounds more like a band, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Yeah, well, they are a prog rock band. I think some bands, they try to escape that label. They don't want to be called prog rock.
It's a cautious label, isn't it? You're like,
but
we prog?
with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you just can't get away from it. And it is prog all the way. Well, the interesting thing about them is Keith Emerson was a keyboard player, and Greg Lake, bass player and singer, Carl Palmer, a drummer. So what is missing there?
Sounds to me like there's missing a crucial instrument in rock and roll, which is the guitar.
Yes, and I will say to you, I would dare to say that the most important thing they've done for rock and roll is to be a rock band without a guitar player.
We said in the first episode, and we will say it in every subsequent episode. Think about all the episodes we've done before. Dire Straits, we talked about Mark Knopfler and his lack of solos, but the solos still came. We did Hendrix, we did Slash, we did Brian May with Queen, we did Zeppelin. And all the ones, I'm sure a lot we do in the future will have some relevance to the guitar. But this does not have a guitar in it.
No.
Fantastic.
No, and it's an interesting thing, though. I think Keith Emerson played in a band before. They couldn't find a guitar player, or they lost a guitar player for some reason, whatever. And he liked the way the band sounded without a guitar. And he thought, you know what, my next band is not going to have a guitar. And Keith Emerson was, in many occasions, the leader of the band. He was a virtuoso piano player, classical.
Classically trained.
Yeah, classically trained, but also really good at jazz and everything else. And it's like... you can't find too many keyboard players in rock and roll as good as him. I would say him, John Lord, and Rick Wakeman were the top three keyboard players. As a reference, of course, there's loads of good guys out there, but they were like the guys who changed keyboard in rock and roll. They made the instrument as relevant as the guitar.
We'll put a Rick Wakeman tune, a Deep Purple tune with John Lord into the Spotify playlist for this episode. But I want to kick off with a segment. Actually, I want to do for you. I want to do a quiz. How much does Felipe know about Emerson, Lake and Palmer? Or let's do ELP, because if we have to say it every time, it'll get quite long.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Well, we're talking about Emerson, Lake and Palmer now. Are you going to ask me questions about Emerson, Lake and Palmer?
I am. Here we go. Question 1. How many roadies did they take on their 1977 tour? A, 54, B, 63, or C, 72?
Which year was that?
1977.
I'll go for the highest number. I'm
72?
guessing. Yeah, 72.
Wrong. They took 63 roadies with
still
them.
a lot.
It's still a lot, isn't it?
Was that the time when the piano was going upside down and stuff like that?
I think so,
yeah.
That's 63 fees to pay. That's 63 mouths to feed every night. That's 63 hotel rooms to get. This is a big operation. It justifies it for where they were in their career.
Oh yeah, because they were really into the visuals and the show itself, not just the music. Yeah.
Question 2. I'm going to give you 5 different occupations. 3 of these are people that came on as roadies.
God.
You've got to tell me which 3 did they bring with them on the tour.
You're obsessed with the roadies now.
I just found this stuff really interesting, to be honest.
Okay.
So, a karate instructor, a carpet cleaner, a comedian, a doctor, and a sushi chef. 3 of those came on the road with them. Tell me which 3.
A karate instructor.
Is that one of your guesses?
Yeah.
Correct. That is one of the 3.
Can you repeat the other ones?
Yeah, so the other 4, carpet cleaner, comedian, sushi chef, Doctor?
Man, I'm going to go for the Doctor and the Comedian.
Doctor is correct. Comedian is not. So you've got sushi chef and carpet cleaner
God,
left.
that's so Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Like, you're getting those guys on tour as roadies.
So you've got karate instructor and doctor correct. You've now got one more to get. Sushi chef or the carpet cleaner?
The sushi chef.
No.
The carpet cleaner. Right.
One of them, I think it was Greg Lake, had a carpet under his stall every night. Every show, he had a carpet that he used to want to walk on because he liked the feel of it under his feet. So he brought a carpet cleaner along.
Well, the karate instructor is Carl Palmer, isn't it? He was.
I feel like it was for Emerson, but you could be right. I'm not sure. But yeah, one of them. Maybe you're right, yeah. So a karate instructor, a carpet cleaner, and a doctor.
God.
As part of the 63 roadie crew, yeah.
Good.
Brilliant. Right, question 3. Which two bands were on tour in 1969 which resulted in the creation of ELP?
1969?
Yes.
Is The Nice one of them?
Yes.
Got it.
So The Nice was Keith Emerson's main band at that time?
At the time. And he had David O'Least on the guitar, which I had the pleasure to meet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Right. The Nice. And who was the other? Oh, King Crimson?
Well done.
Yeah, there you go.
Well done.
Got it.
Excellent. Yeah, so
not doing that bad today.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We'll give you 1 point for the job one because the carpet cleaner was kind of tricky.
I should have thought of it because I know Greg Lake was obsessed with the carpet. Right.
So we'll give you. You can have the mark for question 2. Question 4. Who was the first drummer Lake and Emerson approached for the band?
Wait a minute. Was it Mitch Mitchell?
It was, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
I still remember.
Question 5. The press reported rumours of a planned supergroup called Help that was named after the initials of the band members, E. Emerson, L. Lake, P. Palmer, but who was the H?
Hendrix.
Yes, yeah, brilliant. Did you know that?
I do that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So there,
Help.
they were
what
going
a
to
band
be.
they would have been.
God, can you imagine?
Hendrix, Emerson,
I
Lake,
think
and
what
Palmer.
would have been fantastic about it is that their music is so rigid and, in a sense, classical because of how, sort of, like I said, how rigid it is. Imagine what Hendrix would have brought to that with his wildness of the solos and his riffs. That would have been interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. But again, I'll go back to what I think. It wouldn't be so much different in that sense. Like, they wouldn't bring so much innovation if they had a guitar player.
Yeah, again, yeah, well done. Yeah, good point. Question 6. Which famous musician roadied for The Nice?
Ooh. Don't know. I'm going to guess David Gilmour.
No, it was Lemmy of Motorhead. And
Really?
quick little fact, Lemmy gave Emerson a knife. And Emerson would use this knife on gigs to hold down piano keys when he wanted to go and play other synths.
Yeah.
So if he wanted to hold a note, if he
key.
wanted to hold a note in one of his keyboards, he'd stab it down and then he'd move to his other keyboards and play the solos on the others. It was incredible. And final question. How many tons of equipment would they use on tour? 20, 30 or 40 tons?
30.
40. 40 tons. But when you see the size of the Hammond organ he uses and the speakers they brought with them, kind of justify.
Yeah, and that's an interesting element of their music, isn't it? It's like they were totally into the show, how the show's going to look.
Yeah.
And it has to look big.
But the only thing that mattered more than the look was the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. So for those who don't know, ELP is formed of 3 guys, as Felipe said. Keith Emerson, who played keyboards and synths. Greg Lake, who played bass, acoustic guitar, electric guitar and sang. And Carl Palmer, who played drums and percussion. They formed in 1970. Like I said, in 1969, The Nice and King Crimson were on tour together. Emerson wanted to form a new band and Greg Lake wanted out of King Crimson. So they thought, brilliant, let's do this together.
Exactly.
And in 1970, they released their first album, which was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which has a number of your favourite songs on, doesn't it?
Well, the first,
Quickly,
I think...
I'll just say quickly that Felipe is a big fan of ELP and he's known them for years. I don't know anything. When he said I want to record ELP... I went and all this week I've done my homework. So I discovered, I was recommended ELP this week and got into them, only started listening to them 5 days ago.
How are you finding them so far?
I'm finding it really, really interesting because it's prog unlike any other prog I've heard. And what I mean by that is that, I will talk about it more in a bit, but you can tell they all love classical music.
Yeah.
And I think the difference with other prog bands is they don't make it so obvious. They'll try and mix the technique and talent that they need for classical by writing rock solos or blues or jazz solos played over hard rock. ELP don't seem afraid to just say, hey, we love classical music, so we're going to... And this is what they did. The first few, I don't want to say the first few songs, but on each of their first few albums, they had songs that they named something else, but they were they were obviously, so much so that they would admit it, sections taken from pieces of classical music.
Yeah.
They used Bach all the time. The other composers that I'll talk about later that they used, they loved it. And it's like, well, in the classical world, I did speak on this on one of the episodes last year. In the classical world, it is okay to take passages of music from one composer and put it into another one. It was called quoting.
Yeah.
We spoke about it. I remember it was Zeppelin 2, and we said, well, Zeppelin have copied this song. But in classical music, you call it quoting. Bach has quoted Beethoven in this piece. And this is all they're doing here. Yeah. They're quoting their favourite classical pieces, or they're playing those classical pieces using rock instruments.
Exactly.
So it's been really interesting because it's been a prog that I haven't found, parental guidance warning, in music world. Prog is often, bad prog music can often be referred to as wanky. And that means that people, wanky prog, because people, some prog bands just love to solo and play as many notes as they can without any consideration for the music. And as it would suggest, we say they are wanking over their guitar because they just play all these notes for the sake of it. This has the wanky... This, Emerson ELP have the wanky effect, but I don't ever listen to it and think, oh, they're just playing for the sake of it. There is always a musical basis on their songs, and that's what's impressed me most.
Exactly. Because if you... using your influence of classical music, there's loads of virtuoso classical composers, and obviously Keith Emerson was into that kind of stuff. And I keep talking about him because I think he was the leader in terms of composition, in terms of the concept of what the band should be.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, they're playing classical music with rock instruments. Yeah, and the keyboard, isn't it like the perfect middle ground between classical and rock in terms of instrument? Because it's something between a piano or organ and a guitar. It's like it can be as noisy as a guitar, and that's one thing I believe they did really well. They compensated for the lack of guitars by using the Hammond organ, the Moog, and sometimes distorted bass. If you listen to, I think it's The Barbarians, the first song of the first album, you have a heavy distorted riff, but it's not a guitar, it's a bass. It's the bass,
yeah.
So
if Keith Emerson wanted another keyboard sound, it's just simple: stab the key.
Stab the key.
And there's your fourth band member. The knife.
That's insane.
Lemmy's knife is the fourth band member of ELP. ELPK.
The knife. The knife was an important element. But that was also part of the visual. He was like shaking the organ on stage as well.
If you could go and find it on YouTube, because he abused his Hammond organ to my goodness. And one of those 63 roadies was a guy who would fix the Hammond organ every night because it's true. He said it. He would, not only the stabs, but he would. For those watching on video, if this is the Hammond organ stood up, he'd push it back, he'd put it on one corner and twist it round like that because he's just nuts. Well, it's a visual thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think the reason why they never actually got together with Hendrix and they didn't have a guitar player is I think Keith Emerson wanted to be the star of the band. He didn't want to share solos with anyone. I think there's rumors that he was really vocal about that. So I don't want anyone to share the solos. I'm the star of the band.
Did Lake never solo or not? Did not solo as often?
Well, no, there's not. There's pretty much no electric guitar. So Greg Lake would record some electric guitar for some overdubs and some acoustic guitars, but always as a rhythmic
never as a lead instrument.
Never as a lead instrument. And his bass playing was quite simple comparing to what the other two guys were doing. Yes. I think Greg Lake was the glue really there to make Carl Palmer work with Keith Emerson, because they both virtuosos, and Greg Lake for me is an awesome singer. is, I don't know, man. If I ever do my top 5 rock singers, he's going to be there.
Really?
Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
I think it's such a clean, yet powerful.
No, he does.
voice.
I'm a big fan of King Crimson. Oh, big fan. I like a few of their albums. In the Court of the Crimson King might be one of my top 20 albums. I
And
love
you can
that.
hear like how Greg Lake
Yes.
was already prepared to be a rock star, to be
Yeah.
the lead singer in a band. And I think the fact that he was probably for the band more a singer than a bass player means he could play consistent, solid like bass lines that kept the band together without making the bass an instrument to show off. He didn't want to show off as a bass player. He was there to be the singer and hold the groove together.
Yeah, that's
because if you listen
important.
to Carl Palmer, they're now talking about Carl Palmer, it's funny because I just showed last a video of Carl Palmer playing a snare
Yeah, it
solo.
was nuts.
If you go on YouTube, we're going to put the link there.
We'll put the link in the show notes.
It's Carl Palmer, the solo. That's the name of it.
Cool, okay.
And it's him and a snare, and it's 2 minutes and a half, and it's like it's going to blow your mind how technical that man was.
And how much you can do
He's-
with just a snare.
yeah.
The rhythms you can vary, the way you're playing it. I won't spoil it because he does some crazy stuff.
It's
one-handed
insane. Stick
stuff.
tricks.
Yeah, stick tricks and all that stuff.
We talked about the classical influence. Now talking about Carl Palmer, he clearly has loads of influence of marching bands and rudimental drumming because you can
Yes.
tell he can
Can you
play.
explain
just-
rudimental drumming for us
well,
quickly?
basically, most drum techniques come from one instrument because drums, obviously, as a plural, is loads of instruments.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of instruments, a combination of drums and cymbals. The most important of those drums is the snare drum, which is common. You can find in classical music and marching bands, and the rudiments. They all come from the snare. They're all combinations of stickings of right left left, whatever combinations you do, those are the rudiments. So he was really good with rudimental drumming.
Yeah.
He could just be as musical as you can possibly be with just a snare in front of him. And obviously when he had the whole kit applying to the whole kit, he had all the tools he needed to do that in a musical way, and played really fast when needed. Like, the interesting thing about him, just like it makes me think why they wanted Mitch Mitchell as a drummer, because their style is fairly similar. They do understand a lot about jazz.
Yeah.
Also, just mentioning this, Carl Palmer was really good with brushes, which are those quieter sticks. Literally, they're brushes. They don't sound like drumsticks, and they're very common in jazz and country. He was really good with them. You can hear a lot of that in the first album. But the reason why they would want someone like Mitch Mitchell or him is like they wanted that virtuoso drummer with probably jazz background. And if you compare Mitch Mitchell and Carl Palmer to the other drummers of the time, they were not into keeping the groove at all.
Yeah.
So that is, he's always phrasing, always, instead of just keeping a simple beat, he's soloing all the time. Sounds like he's soloing.
Yeah.
So, and to do that in a musical way and still keep the music interesting is not easy. And Carl Palmer, one of the best drummers that have ever walked on earth.
Well,
just saying that.
So ELP, I mean, you can hear it in any of the songs. ELP, like we said, they started in 1970, but here's the craziest thing. ELP were literally an overnight sensation because they started... You didn't know this, right? Check this out. They formed in 1969, and then in 1970 the first album was released. They prepared by doing a mix of classical stuff, so they were just going to cover a few of their favourite classical pieces and some jazz stuff as well. They were going to cover some Dave Brubeck. Nice. They had a bunch of artists of classical music to cover, which I can't find right now. But they knew what they wanted from this act straight away, because after their first rehearsal, which was in Notting Hill, they went and spent £13,000 on synthesizers and mixing desks so that they could achieve the sound they wanted straight away. Now, this doesn't sound like a band who hang about.
No.
So the first gig they played was in Plymouth, which is actually just near Cornwall. Actually, we're pretty close to Plymouth today, on the 23rd of August 1970, and they drove to a gig in a van that was owned by Yes, which is a cool little fact.
Which were their rivals.
Their rivals, and they got paid £400 for it. But they purposely chose a small venue in case it all went wrong and that they were hated. The gig was a success, so I've read. But that's gig one, all right? How's this for gig two? The Isle of Wight Festival, 1970, to 600,000 people that attended over the weekend.
Wow.
So from Plymouth, a small venue, when they say small, I'm assuming maybe 500 people, maybe 1,000 people, maybe a couple of thousand. Then you go
nothing even close to that,
600, well, we say 600,000 people attended the whole weekend, which if you're talking Friday, Saturday, Sunday, let's assume 250,000 people saw them at the Isle of Wight Festival. And they loved it. The press went nuts for it because this was one of rock's first supergroups.
Right, because it was a combination of...
Carl Palmer was in The Crazy World of Arthur Brown.
Arthur Brown was the biggest influence for Bruce Dickinson. For
There you go. We'll put a Crazy World of Arthur Brown song on. Keith Emerson came from The Nice, and Greg Lake came from King Crimson. And funnily enough, this is what Emerson had to say about it. I think we upset a lot of people. It wasn't Crimson, it wasn't The Nice, and it wasn't Crazy World of Arthur Brown. We'd broken up 3 very special bands. And then Lake said about the Isle of Wight Festival, we went from being relatively unknown to globally known over the course of one weekend.
Insane.
Brilliant.
But again, an overnight success, probably a few years in the making, isn't it? Because they were already playing with successful bands. And
well, that's why it's a supergroup, isn't it?
It's a supergroup. So it's not like maybe they got together in a certain point in their careers where they knew exactly what they wanted and they knew they had this skills.
It sounds like they did, didn't they? Yeah. It sounds like they did because they all came together. I mean, here's what Carl Palmer said. I think a rock group doing classical adaptations was a fantastic idea, but we weren't there to educate, we were there to entertain. But in doing so, we actually did open up the doorway.
Yeah. Well, when you're saying we're there to entertain, and the clothes that Keith Emerson would wear on stage, like so flashy, and it's like
I know, yeah,
and colourful, and it's outrageous, really. Yeah. And it's like, why is he wearing that kind of stuff? But he wanted to be a visual, interesting event as well. The piano would go upside down. The knives on the keys and all that stuff. It's a big part of the show. Also, Carl Palmer. I mean, he might have been one of the first drummers to use massive drum kits, like loads of toms and cymbals all around. Do you know how much
his kit cost?
I don't know.
$25,000.
$25,000.
Yeah. And I actually read something. Carl Palmer, again, this is the classical music influence. And I'm just stressing this. Sorry, listeners, I'm just stressing this because they are just so far more classically influenced than any other prog band I've heard.
Yeah,
I'm sure, yes. I'm sure, yes, and I'm sure Rush. I'm sure even modern prog like Dream Theater and Opeth. I'm sure they have classical music that they were influenced by, but it's not as evident as ELP.
Yes, you can hear on their music, but
you can hear it, but I still don't
it's
feel
so much more
as predominant as ELP.
Well, because the main guy in the band, in Emerson, Lake and Palmer, was a keyboard player. So
Carl Palmer said that he would study. So Emerson would send him his favourite pieces of music. There is one, for example, Sinfonietta by Janacek, and French Suite No. 1 in D minor by Johann Sebastian Bach. These were some of Emerson's favourite pieces, and he would send these to Carl Palmer and Greg Lake. Carl Palmer would he'd go to his local music shop and he'd buy the sheet music and listen to it. And if there was an instrument, a percussive instrument, that he heard that he didn't have in his set, he'd go out the next day and buy it. Which is why his kit was so big, as you said.
That's it. He kept building up, and naturally became.
He had a rock drum kit and a classical percussion kit.
Here's an interesting fact about that: the massive kit. So one of his drum kits was not only big but too heavy. I don't know what it was made of, and it was a nightmare to tour with that. So I said, I'm going to sell this one, start from scratch, get another kit. And he did an auction of that thing. And he said, I don't want to even be there. Just someone's going to buy it. I'm going to suffer because I don't have that kit anymore. And he got a phone call the day after the auction. Ringo Starr said, hey, mate, I've got it. I've bought your kit.
What's Ringo going to do with a kit like that?
Don't know. We'll just keep it. And he said, "Well, I'm happy that you got it because like now he's in good hands." And
Incredible!
Is it with the Beatles? So
that's so wholesome that Ringo bought his kit. Amazing.
Like, yeah.
Oh, anyway, right. Let's just do a few little dates and stuff. So ELP, the album, was released in 1970. A year later, they released the album Tarkus. Did that do anything for them, in your opinion?
Well, I would say the first 5 albums.
Okay, so
have
that
a very solid run
of
and
albums.
a very consistent style. So
let me tell you, you got
them.
ELP in 1970, Tarkus in 1971, Pictures at an Exhibition in 1971. Little side note, that's a live album. There's elements on it that they did.
They
record.
didn't write the music.
Yeah. The label wouldn't.
I want to
release
talk a bit about that later. But
okay.
Yeah.
I'll save that then. So that's the third album. Trilogy in 1972 and Brain Salad Surgery in 1973. Those are the first 5 albums. Felipe is going to talk about them in a little bit. They then took a 2-year break and came back in 1976 to record Works Volume 1 and Works Volume 2, which they released in 77. We'll stop there for now. Felipe, tell us about the first 5 albums.
Yeah, so the first 5 albums. So the first one, like, as I said to you, starts with a heavy, distorted bass riff. And
what a way to start your career.
Yeah, exactly. And it's showing we don't have a guitar player. Okay, that's how we're going to do this. And it's got what is, for me, their best piece of music with Take a Pebble. I think
that's
you
lovely.
agree with me.
You sent me that yesterday.
Because
that's
that
wonderful.
song, there's something beautiful about that song.
I said if you take away the vocals, it could be a classical piece of music.
It could. And if you just keep the vocals, it could be the most beautiful pop song ever. It's weird.
And shorten it a bit.
Yeah, of course. But just the vocal parts altogether, they might not be longer than 3 minutes. Basically, when you have that like beautiful, clean, technical vocal line, on top of a piano that is like playing as many notes as you can fit in one bar.
Yeah.
And it's insane that piano doesn't sound aggressive. It doesn't sound like overplaying.
It doesn't sound intrusive. No, you're right.
No, it's just like so nice and so well played. The control they have over the dynamics. It goes up and down. It gets louder, gets quieter, and then there's acoustic guitar at some point. And there's so many parts. And that album is a statement of their musicianship. It's like, we can play.
Yeah.
And again, you got Carl Palmer playing brushes, playing with sticks, playing jazz, country, soloing all over the place. And it's fantastic. So what I think is brilliant about it, they have 5 long prog rock, sometimes almost hard rock, as much as it can be with our guitar. And those songs are there. 5, yes, it was only 5. And then the last song is Lucky Man. Yeah. Which I think was a hit single.
Lovely, that one.
And
that's Greg Lake's one, right?
That's Greg Lake. The thing about Lucky Man is that shows what they were capable of. Okay, we can shred, we can use the all the technique in the world, but we can also write a folk ballad to make you sing along with.
That seemed to be the glue that made this band successful for me. They had the technique, they had the ability, they had the virtuosity. Is that a word? It is now. They had the virtuosity. I'm going to say virtuosity. They had all those things, but they also had a phenomenal songwriter in the band, in Greg Lake.
Yeah, and Greg Lake, maybe he was the one totally capable of leaving his ego behind and to write a simple song. The story, I want to tell the story of that song before we move on. Okay. So I believe the story behind Lucky Man is one of the most interesting things about their career. So they had those 5 long songs recorded for the album, and someone mentioned the album's a bit too short, guys. We need like one more song. And basically look at each other and so we don't have any more songs. So Greg Lake said, well, do you know what? I've got this nice little piece of folk music which I wrote when I was a teenager. I just said, well...
Oh, yeah, he wrote it when he was 12 years old.
He was 12
yeah,
14,
no, I remember that in the film.
And if you hear the lyrics, it's like a medieval tale, isn't it? And it is what it is, like a teenage guy writing a song, about a hero, about a guy who's really lucky, whatever. Yeah. So he played the song, and Keith Emerson looked at him and said, that's rubbish. I won't take a part on that. I'm not doing it.
Oh, my God.
And that was it, off to the pub. So he literally went to a pub, and Carl Palmer said, you know what, mate, let's do something. So Greg Lake went there, recorded the guitar, the acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And Carl Palmer added the drums to it. So, well, sounds more like a song, doesn't it? Yeah, sounds better, yeah. So then he added the guitar solo, electric guitar solo, and the bass. And they were like, wow, it's building up.
Feeling like a song, yeah.
Keith Emerson got back from the pub and listened to the thing and said, wow, this is good. I might do something, If I
was Greg Lake, I'd say no.
Don't give up. But luckily, they let him play, and he used the Moog keyboards to do a weird, crazy, nonsensical solo at the end of this beautiful folk piece.
Oh, okay.
And it was still a hit with that. How you wouldn't imagine that solo for such a beautiful, folk song.
Yeah.
And it is a big part of it now. You listen to it, it's like that. It's a crazy solo. And the guy who created the keyboard, he listened to the song on the radio. He went emotional about it. So I've created that instrument to be played like that.
Oh,
and
wow.
finally someone understood my art, and they put it into music, and it's there for everyone to listen
fantastic.
to. So Keith Emerson, I mean, what a musician. But
incredible.
yeah, so you go from that to Tacos. You have the same elements on the album. You have the musicianship. You have the extreme ability to play whatever they want to play, and playing long songs. One important thing to say about it is they would play everything live. There's not too many. I've mentioned the overdubs when you have acoustic guitars and electric guitars, which are not the main element. Greg Lake would do those overdubs, but in general, they would just go there and finish a take. And that would go straight to the album.
Yesterday I was watching the documentary of them at the Isle of Wight Festival, and it was just staggering that they were playing everything perfectly. Because I just listened to the songs.
They're flawless. Yeah,
they are.
And you think about
musicians.
You're recording with tape, so you don't want to waste a tape by doing mistakes. Not like nowadays you can just delete and start again.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I want to say so Tacos for me is a natural continuation of what they did with the first album. But when they go to pictures at an exhibition, then that's a complete different beast. Because what they did there was like, we're going to actually play classical music as a rock band, not something that resembles classical music. So they got this classical Russian composer, Mussorgsky, I can't pronounce his name. Not going to even attempt. I tried. Okay, failed.
Whoever this guy is, we'll put him in the playlist.
It's just like I can't pronounce. I'm terrible with Russian. My Russian's not that good. Basically, Keith Emerson has been to one of his gigs, and not one of his gigs. He's been to a concert. Not the guy's gigs from the 18th. Whatever. 1817 or something when he did that. He's been to a concert where his music was played, and he bought the music score, and he thought, you know what, this is beautiful. I want to do this one day, but I want to do it as a rock band. And by the time they finished Tacos, it was like, no, I think now's the time. We can do this. People respect us. Let's go and do it. So
but the label rejected it.
The label didn't like it, and they recorded live in the theatre. The label didn't like it. They re-recorded it at Newcastle City Hall.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the final version is the one from Newcastle City Hall. But the Musicians Union, they were really concerned about Keith Emerson stabbing the local organ that they had at the City Hall. And they made him sign a contract saying, you're not going to stab the organ. Which they didn't.
Did he sign a false name?
Oh, yeah.
Brilliant. Trilogy and Brain Salad Surgery, anything to say on them, or is it just a continuation of what they did in the studio? For me, it's a continuation.
I think the song in the beginning from Trilogy is one I recommend everyone to listen to.
What's that one?
Trilogy in the Beginning.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I thought you meant at the beginning of the album.
No.
So the song is called In the Beginning, so we'll put that on the thing.
Yeah.
Interestingly,
it's one of the, again, you have like beautiful vocals and the same elements. As I said to you, I think it's all very consistent.
Yeah.
And I just want to, again, recommend a song from Brain Salad Surgery. I mean, Jerusalem is a fantastic piece of music, but I want to recommend Still You Turn Me On, which has the same... for me, the same impact as Lucky Man, because it's an acoustic song with a guitar. If I'm not wrong, there's a wah-wah pedal and a guitar riff that happens at the end of the chorus. But it's again, beautiful ballad, acoustic ballad. And Greg Lake used to play those two songs one after the other on a gig. So Lucky Man.
Well, we'll put these all in the playlist for you guys to hear. Interestingly, so the two albums they released in 77, Works Volume 1 and Works Volume 2, it was essentially a double album.
Yeah.
And what they did is each member got a side. So one side of the vinyl was all of Emerson's songs. The second side of the vinyl was all of Lake's songs. The third side of the vinyl was all Palmer's songs. And the fourth side of the vinyl was something they'd worked on together. So I think that's quite nice because that really, I mean, we spoke with Creedence where they were fighting for the other band members to have some songwriting stuff.
It's usually disastrous, isn't it?
It is, but it seems to have worked here because the Works was critically acclaimed pretty well.
It was, yeah. It's, probably if you mentioned Creedence doing that and not kind of working really well.
Didn't work out at all. Yeah.
Pink Floyd did that as well.
Yeah, that didn't work out well.
It's kind of some good.
Something's missing.
Yes, there's some good compositions there, but it just doesn't sound like a band. So, but the Works is a complete different thing, isn't it?
That's worth a listen to.
The Works.
The Works. Now, the album that came out after that would turn out to be their final album of that first period in their career, because as we'll go on to say, they did split up and get back together again. Love Beach, released in 1978, was a failure. But the reason it was is because...
If you look at the album cover, God.
Really?
God. They look so 80s.
They dismissed it as a band. As a band, they have said, we don't want to take ownership of that album. They only did it because they had contractually one album left to record on their record deal.
So they had to release it.
So they had to do an album, and they just put anything together, and they said, "I release this." So
I got down vinyl.
Yeah, have you? Is it any good? No. Oh God! So after that, I mean, maybe if the album's as bad as you said, it explains why they broke up in 1979. They did often have disputes, mainly Emerson and Lake, about the songwriting and the direction they'd want their songs to go in. They didn't always see eye to eye, but they got back together in 1991. They released 2 more albums, which was Black Moon in 1992 and In the Hot Seat in 1994. Then they did a few years of touring, and I know they did a big tour in 1996 where they went to Europe, Japan, Asia, the USA, South America as well. They did a huge tour. But again, because of creative differences, they did break up again in 1998. And then in 2010, they got together for what would be the final time to do a massive worldwide tour. And they played at High Voltage Festival in London. I can't remember which park it was at. It wasn't Hyde Park. I don't remember, but they played because it was the 40th anniversary. 2010 was 40 years since the LP got together, and that would turn out to be their final ever UK show. Critics said it was amazing. The audiences loved it, and ELP was no more after that.
Yeah, and then Keith Emerson died and Greg Lake died, and obviously, so it's a band that left their legacy, and it's never going to be a band again.
Yeah, exactly.
They're gone. But
a few quotes of what people have had to say for it. I mean, I've got one good quote that I found, which is from Rolling Stone, who said, "ELP turned prog from a black light in the basement listening experience to a stadium-filling phenomenon," which I wholeheartedly agree with.
Well, it's impressive, isn't it? I know it was the 70s and people were into crazy stuff, but the length of those songs and the craziness and the improvisation and the...
To keep an audience's attention for a song that's 12 minutes long. Stadium band, you're right, yeah.
prog bands are not stadium bands.
And forget the music. The fact that they were able to do that and provide the fans with what they want is something incredible in itself, isn't it? Now, unfortunately, there are some negative reviews. It's quite often with prog bands; they do get negative reviews.
They exaggerate, don't they?
Yeah. So I don't. This is apparently there's no author to this quote. It's just a 70s joke. How do you spell pretentious? ELP. I'm not. You can't attribute that quote to anyone. It's a joke.
Is it a pretentious?
Famous music critic Robert Christgau said, "These guys are as stupid as their most pretentious fans. The world's most overweening progressive group." Weaning might be the parent-friendly word for what we call wanky. So, I mean, Robert just thinks, obviously, they just play too many notes. And he goes on to say, oh no, hold on, this is John Kellman from All About Jazz, who would say, "They have an overbearing sense of self-importance, and it turned ELP from one of the 1970s most exciting new groups into the definition of masturbatory excess and self-aggrandizement in only a few short years." People don't like long songs with loads of notes on.
But
There's a place for it, and I think ELP mastered how to do it well. The critics don't agree, but
I would
we're
say
the fans. Our opinion matters more than the critics.
Exactly, and when the albums sell that well, I mean, it's a success, regardless of what people say.
Where is it? Just looking for my notes. 48 million albums sold worldwide. 9 albums went to gold.
God, that's a success. For a prog band,
it's a success. You can't call it anything else than that. Well, is there right? I think that's a good place to wrap up the show.
Yeah, it is.
Would you want to give us your final statement and thoughts on ELP?
What I would say, I mean, regarding their whole career is prog music is essentially over the top. And they've managed to be on the edge of what that means. They are over the top, close to the point of collapse, which is what happens. Maybe that's why it was so hard for them to stay together as a band. They had to break up so many times.
Well, the reason that they found it so hard in the end is because due to financial restrictions, they were told that, listen, for the next album, you've got to take it down. We can't be hiring orchestras for all this. So you're right. I mean, you are actually literally correct. The music was so over the top that actually they said, sorry, we can't afford this for the next album. And that was the start of their collapse.
So I think, to quote Spinal Tap here, good rock and roll should hurt.
It should affect your life, but not necessarily for the better.
And that's ELP. It does change your life.
That's a good summary. So, for me, ELP, again, please remember,
as a new band for you.
As a new band, and listen, prog rock, prog metal is not the music genre I've listened to the most. There's a lot of prog rock and metal bands that I really do like. Opeth are one of them. I really enjoy Dream Theater. Yes and Rush have done it for me as well. Here's what I have to say about it. Prog music can be wanky. We know this. But ELP found that lovely balance because they played the music they wanted, the classical stuff, the way they wanted to in a rock environment. And I think it produced the best results. And then to add to that, the brilliance of Greg Lake's songwriting means that it stops just being, let's play as many notes as we can and let's put a structure towards this. Let's structure these so that it comes out as a long song and not a series of notes to show how good we are.
And despite all the soloing, all the notes, all the complexity, you've got one of the most beautiful voices in rock and roll.
Yeah, Greg Lake,
which is incredible. In itself is a reason for you to listen to them.
I'd like to leave and end this with a quote that for me sums up ELP, and this is by music critic Sean Murphy. He says this: "Here are 3 words that strike fear into the hearts of all those allergic to prog rock. Emerson, Lake, Palmer. Popular enough to have several songs still in the regular FM rotation, obscure enough to be forever relegated as one of those bands from a certain time and place, like the 70s. Ambitious enough to attempt things few, if any other bands did, for better or for worse. Pretentious enough to earn the full-throated derision of holier-than-thou tastemakers. And album art awful enough to ensure they will never be forgotten." Isn't that lovely? Brilliant. I think everything you said there is true, and it's like you said, they were they did go over the top. They did almost push things too far, but the songwriting brought it in. Yeah, their humbleness brought it in. Them as guys brought it in. Yeah, and you're left with one of the most important prog rock bands in the history of music.
There you go.
Yeah, excellent.
Well said.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining us for another episode. Hope you've had a good time. As usual, please follow on our socials and give us a like, a subscribe, a share. We are on Twitter and Instagram at longliverocknrollpod, and we are on Facebook and YouTube if you search the Long Live Rock and Roll Podcast. Apple Podcast listeners, we'd really appreciate if you gave us a review on the Apple Podcasts app because it helps with the algorithms and the listings and it moves us up further on the charts.
Please follow us, and if we reach 7 billion followers, I'm going to shave my head. Just say.
Is that not incentive enough? There we go. Thank you very much, guys.
And keep on rocking, everyone.
And as usual, long live rock and roll.